Yo, what's going on, guys? It's your boy Rook, or you can call me Bogdan, and welcome back to another episode of Disturbing Fictional Case Files. So, guys, before I start with the stories, I want to say that I'm pivoting this content to something new. I will definitely record what I enjoy recording from myself. Of course, it will be blurred, the ambient will be good. But guys, you'll see some gaming footage in background. Okay, like, you can write down in the comments, what do you enjoy more? Do you enjoy more like the visuals we were making about the stories, or this new pivoting that I plan like to move on, just to stay safe and authentic? So yeah, I hope you support me, guys, and stay until the very end of the episode. And before we continue with the stories, I have prepared, as I said, 3 disturbing case files, okay, fictional to mention. And tonight, the first one, like, it starts with printing missing person reports. Then we move to another one that is about waterfall that runs upwards after midnight. And last but not least, a lunar sample starts growing here. I hope you enjoy. Again, subscribe, like, comment down below. I don't know how much times I said this, but yeah, enjoy into the video.
The slot machine. Printed missing person reports. The first report came out of a slot machine at 2:17 in the morning, printed on thermal paper that was still warm enough to curl in my hand. I know the exact time because I was watching the surveillance clock when it happened. Camera 14, high limit south, 2:17:03. The old machine sat under a tired fluorescent tube near the closed baccarat pit, its brass trim dull, its cracked red button lit from inside like a bad tooth. The cabinet was called Desert Queen, number DQ-09, one of 6 antique slots the Monarch kept for atmosphere after the rest of the floor went digital. The Monarch did not pay in coins anymore. No serious casino did. Everything ran on ticket in, ticket out, player cards, voucher printers, cage audits, compliance logs. Even the antiques had been gutted and retrofitted years earlier. That was why the strip bothered me before I read it. It was too long. It did not print like a voucher. It kept coming, folding over itself in the payout tray, pale and narrow and official looking. I tore it free because a tourist was reaching for it, grinning like he had found some secret jackpot. Then I saw the heading. Missing person. Report subject, Daniel Lewis Harker. Age, 41. Last seen, Monarch Desert Casino. Pit 3. Date, May 4th time, 2:19. Reporting. Party, Elias Vance. Security Shift Supervisor. My name sat there in faded black heat ink, spelled correctly, employee title correct, no signature line needed because the paper seemed to have already decided I was involved. I had not reported anyone missing. I had never heard the name Daniel Harker, and according to the surveillance clock, the time listed on the report was still 2 minutes in the future. The Monarch Desert Casino stood 12 miles off the interstate, far enough from the new resorts to feel like a rumor, and too proud to admit it had become a place people stopped only when their gas gauge made the choice. The sign outside showed a crowned woman pouring silver dollars from a pitcher. Half the bulbs were dead, so at night she looked less royal than trapped. Inside, the building never rested. Fluorescent lights hummed over patched felt. Ice machines hummed behind bars that sold more club soda than champagne. The carpet made a dry static whisper under every shoe, patterned with red diamonds and gold stars, chosen by a man in 1978 who thought dizziness looked expensive. On slow nights, the sound system played lounge instrumentals so quietly they seemed to come from inside your teeth. That night was slow enough for the building to have privacy. I took the strip back to the security room and pulled camera feeds. Daniel Harker entered through the east doors at 1:58 a.m. He was alone, no luggage, no drink, no obvious hurry. He paused under the ceiling mirror and looked up, giving us a clean view of his face. Narrow cheeks, dark hair, grey linen jacket, white shirt, black trousers, wedding ring on his right hand. The report had that detail too. At 2:03, he sat at blackjack table 7, which put him in pit 3, exactly where the paper said he would be last seen. The dealer was Nora Keane. Nora had worked nights at the Monarch for 19 years and could spot a losing man before he touched his wallet. She did not frighten easily. When I came down with the report folded in my pocket, she looked at me once and said, "He hasn't done anything wrong." "Who?" She nodded toward Daniel. He was buying in with $100 bills so crisp they looked ironed. "Gray jacket," she said. "He asked whether the casino still has rooms upstairs." "It doesn't." I told him that. "What did he say?" Nora dealt 2 cards without looking down. "He said it has rooms if the lights come on." I might have dismissed that as gambler poetry if the pit boss, Armand Sol, had not gone pale when I showed him the strip. Armand was a broad man with silver hair and the permanent fatigue of someone who had spent 3 decades watching people believe the next hand would undo their lives. He read the report twice. "Where did this print?" "Desert Queen." That machine was supposed to be removed. It was supposed to be removed in 2008. "No," he said. "Tonight." Before I could ask what that meant, Daniel Harker stood from table 7 with a stack of black chips and no smile. Nora's hand froze above the shoe. The other players looked irritated, not afraid. Nobody ever recognizes the start of a thing while it is still small enough to stop. Daniel walked toward the south wall. The report said last seen at 2:19. The surveillance clock read 2:18:43. I started after him. Distance changes under casino lights. The aisle between us seemed to stretch, carpet stars sliding under my shoes, machines blinking impatient colors. A woman laughed at video poker. Somewhere a coin fell, which should have been impossible. Daniel reached Desert Queen at 2:19. He did not sit. He placed 1 black chip on top of the cabinet, like an offering, and pressed the cracked red button. The reel spun. Crowns, bells, lemons. The symbols blurred behind glass. Daniel leaned close, as if listening. The fluorescent tube above him flickered out, came back colder, and for 1 second I saw a reflection in the slot glass that did not belong to the casino floor. A hallway, blue-white light, cream walls, paper scattered across the carpet, a service counter far away. Daniel opened his mouth like he recognized someone. Every antique slot on the south wall rang once. Not jackpot music, a desk bell. When the light steadied, Daniel was gone. His black chip remained on the cabinet. Desert Queen's printer started chattering again. The second report said, "Supplemental missing person. Report subject located. No additional missing parties identified." Yes. It listed 3 names under Daniel's. Ruth Bell, 23, cocktail server, missing 1981. Martin Kessler, 54, floor manager, missing 1994. Anita Cho, 36, guest, missing 2002. Each had a case number. Each had a last seen location inside the Monarch. The language looked official, but not quite human. It was close enough to paperwork to make my skin crawl. Ruth Bell's note said, "Accepted extra shift. after lights blinked twice. Martin Kessler said, entered count room to reconcile negative money. Anita Cho said, attempted to claim prize from machine not on active floor map. Daniel Harkes said, responded to personal invitation. Armand took the strip from me. His fingers shook once, then steadied. Shut the machine down. I opened Desert Queen with my supervisor key. The cabinet's interior light came on, yellow and greasy. Behind the ticket printer and circuit boards, where the back panel should have been, there was open space. Not darkness. Space. A narrow corridor continued through the machine, painted the same old cream as the Monarch's back offices. At the far end, a fluorescent tube buzzed above a floor covered in paper. I slammed the cabinet shut hard enough to cut my palm on the trim. For 9 seconds, Desert Queen went dark. Then the slot beside it printed. Then the next. Then all 6 antiques along the south wall began issuing paper, strips spilling from payout trays and pooling onto the carpet. Missing person reports. Employees, guests, contractors, entertainers, a refrigeration repairman, a woman who came in to use the restroom during a bus stop and never returned to her seat. Dates ranged from 1979 to that night. Locations formed a map only a longtime employee would understand. Sunroom, Gold Service Hall, Original Cashier Cage, Level 2 Hospitality Corridor, Room 618. The Monarch had no Level 2 open to guests. The hotel tower had been closed for years. Room 618 should not have existed anywhere reachable by a living person. Armand was not surprised enough. What happened in 2008? I asked. He did not answer at first. He watched the paper print as if it were snow falling indoors. A comp slip came out of Desert Queen, he said, for a buffet we hadn't offered in 10 years. That's all? It had my mother's signature on it. Your mother worked here. She died before the casino opened. He said it flatly. Then he took Daniel's black chip from the cabinet top and put it in his pocket. Do not cash anything tonight, he told me. No vouchers, no markers, no hand pays, nothing. Why? Money is how it asks permission. At 2:34 a.m., the phone stopped working. At 2:41, the cage printers began producing marker agreements for dead people. At 2:45, the jackpot sign above the main floor changed from tonight's progressive amount to a single message. Claims pending, 113. At 2:50, camera 18 came online. Camera 18 had been offline for 3 months. It was listed in our system as awaiting replacement after a power surge. I had walked under the dead dome myself, but there it was on the monitor wall, showing a room I had never seen. High angle, green carpet, beige walls, fluorescent lights, a service counter with brass bars, filing cabinets behind it, people standing in a line that ran out of frame. They were dressed across decades, wide lapels, tracksuits, cocktail uniforms, old casino security jackets. A man wore the blue satin coat of a lounge act whose poster hung near the employee lockers. A child in a red windbreaker held an arcade cup full of coins. At the counter sat Ruth Bell. I recognized her from one of the printed reports, from the grainy copy of an employee badge attached to the strip. Young face, feathered hair, smile caught between practiced and real. On camera 18, she had not aged. Her cocktail uniform was immaculate. Her eyes were open too wide. She stamped papers with slow precision. Stamp, slide, stamp, slide. The line advanced one place each time. Above Ruth, a sign read, All payouts, final. Luis Ortega, my second god, whispered something in Spanish, and crossed himself. He had tried to go outside to call for help, then came back from the east vestibule holding a report with his own name on it. Status: returned before completion. Recommendation: do not exit while balance remains. What did you see outside? I'd asked. The parking lot, he said, but far away, like through water, and there was a desk between me and it. A woman behind the desk. No face, just hair, and a name tag. What name? Ruth. Now Ruth looked up at camera 18, and the picture seemed to turn toward us without the camera moving. The office printer woke. Please bring the black chip. Armand touched his pocket. Do not, I said. He gave me a tired look. You think keeping it helps? I think taking it where it asks you to take it is worse. The casino already took it. From who? Nora answered from the office doorway. From everyone. She had left table 7 without being called. In one hand, she held a deck of cards. In the other, a stack of reports, already sorted by date. Nora told us what the older employees had whispered about Ruth Bell. In 1981, Ruth picked up an extra cocktail shift after another server called in sick. Near closing, she found a black chip under Desert Queen. $100, more than a day's pay. She tried to turn it in. The cage refused it as a dead tournament chip. When she passed Desert Queen again, the machine printed a comp slip for room 618. Back then, parts of the hotel were still open. Enough for conventions, enough for secrets. Ruth went upstairs. She never came back. Management said she quit. Her family filed a report. The sheriff came twice. The casino produced time cards, witness statements, and a final paycheck with a signature no one wanted to examine too closely. After that, Desert Queen developed a reputation. It paid better, Luis asked. Not jackpot better, Nora said. Need better. What does that mean? People got what they needed. Rent, bail, bus fare, surgery money, cash to leave somebody, cash to stay quiet. The machine always knew the amount. On camera 18, a new figure entered the line. Daniel Harker. Gray jacket, white shirt, no expression. In his hand, he held a folded paper token. The line moved. He stepped forward. We have to get him out before he reaches the counter, I said. Armand opened an old green cash box he had brought from his office. Inside was a work order printed on yellowed paper. Monarch Desert, hotel and casino date, May 4th machine, DQ-09, Desert Queen, remove machine, retain balance. The second box was checked. At the bottom was my signature. Not a perfect forgery. Worse, it looked like my signature, written by someone who had studied years of forms I had not yet signed. This was in my inbox at 1:30, Armand said. Corporate ordered the machine removed tonight. Why didn't you show me? Because I hoped it was only paper. That was the monarch in one sentence. We all hoped problems stayed paper. Paper could be filed, disputed, lost, misread. Paper had edges. At 3:04, the fax machine rang. No one had used it in years. It sat under a tarp beside archived tapes. 4 rings, then a page came through, hot and stinking of dust. It was an old floor map of the hotel tower. Room 618 was circled in red. Below that, in my handwriting, bring current balance to window. The map showed an access route through the original cashier cage, a sealed corridor behind the current cage, and the old hotel elevators near the lounge. One problem: those elevators had been drywalled over years ago. On the main floor, guests had started forming lines at dead kiosks. Each person held a strip of paper. Some cried. Some looked embarrassed, as if debt were more shameful than fear. A man kept saying he only won $80. A woman near the bar asked whether taxes applied if the prize was her husband coming back. The slot screens all displayed the same number, 113, then 114. Somebody screamed in the restroom corridor. We did not have time to understand that one. Nora and Luis went to the electrical room to cut power. Armand and I went to the old cage with the black chip and the faxed map. The service door behind the cashier cage opened with a code Armand remembered too easily. Inside was a narrow hall that smelled colder than the rest of the building. Fluorescent lights blinked awake one by one ahead of us. At the end stood the original cashier cage, brass bars tarnished black, marble counter cracked, green lamps glowing without cords. Behind the bars were filing cabinets, claimed, unclaimed, pending, void, escalated. The pending drawer trembled. Armand placed Daniel's black chip on the counter. A bell rang. Paper assembled itself from the cabinets and slid through the bars. A pen rolled toward me. Missing person, balance, adjustment current, party, Daniel Lewis, Harker, transferable, yes, next responsible, party, Elias Vance. I stepped back. The pen rolled after me and stopped at the counter edge. Beyond the filing cabinets, through a panel of frosted glass, I saw a line of people passing in silence. One wore a grey jacket. Daniel, I called before I could stop myself. Armand seized my sleeve. Do not use names here. Too late. Every drawer behind the cage opened. Folders shot out and struck the brass bars, bursting open, spilling photographs and reports. The green lamps flared. From behind the frosted glass, Ruth Bell's voice said, "Security has acknowledged party." The side gate unlocked. We ran. When we burst back onto the casino floor, Nora and Luis were waiting. Luis's palm was smeared black with ink. Main disconnect is locked open, Nora said. Open means off. Tonight, it means room 618. Every breaker label changed while we read them, Luis said. Every single one. Across the floor, Desert Queen lit from base to crown. Its display no longer showed fruit or credits. It showed a room number, 618. The machine began paying out brass hotel keys. They dropped one by one into the tray, clattering over each other, each attached to a diamond-shaped fob stamped with the monarch crown. One slid across the carpet and stopped against my shoe. 618. Elias Vance. Security. I did not pick it up. Armand did. Nora's face changed. No. He looked at her with old shame. Ruth was my shift. The confession came out with no drama, because the room had become too small to hold the lie. In 1981, Armand had been an assistant pit boss, young and broke and hungry for authority. Ruth found the black chip and asked him what to do. When the cage refused it and Desert Queen printed the room comp, Armand told himself the voucher might have cash value. He followed Ruth upstairs, planning to talk her into splitting whatever it was. At the 6th floor, the hall lights were on, though that wing was closed. Room 618 stood open. Inside, he saw a guest services counter where no counter could be. Ruth stood before it with the chip in her hand. She asked if he had told anyone. He said no. Then she said, "Good. It only needs one witness." The door shut. Armand found himself back at the elevator with a $100 bill in his pocket. Ruth was gone. A week later, he paid rent. A month later, he was promoted. For 45 years, the monarch let him keep the balance. Now it wanted reconciliation. The jackpot sign clicked to 115. The wall near the lounge flickered. A steak night poster vanished. Behind it stood 2 polished brass elevator doors that had not existed for years. Above them, the needle indicator pointed to 6. The overhead speakers clicked. All parties with pending claims, please proceed to hospitality. Guests began to line up, not rushing, not fighting, worse, obeying. A red velvet stanchion appeared between them and the elevator, guiding them into an orderly queue. People tried to step away and found the rope politely in front of them wherever they turned. Nora ran to Desert Queen and opened the card shoe she had carried from table 7. She had filled it with matchbooks. She struck one. For one bright second, fire crawled up the printed reports, blackening names into ash. Then every sprinkler head above the south wall opened. Black ink poured down. It blasted out the flame and soaked Nora from hair to shoes. Where the ink touched the carpet, letters appeared. Fire, suppression, fee applied. Desert Queen spun by itself. Crown, crown, crown. The elevator doors opened. Inside was not an elevator car. Inside was the 6th floor hallway, lit blue-white, carpet fresh, doors lined in impossible perspective. At the far end, room 618 stood open. Beyond it waited the guest services counter and Ruth Bell's steady hand. Daniel Harker stood 3 people from the front of the line. Armand walked in. Nora followed him. I followed Nora. Louise cursed and followed me. The doors closed behind us, and the casino noise vanished. The 6th floor smelled of chilled linen, cigarette smoke, and toner. Room service trays sat outside doors, each covered by a silver dome. Under one dome, I saw driver's licenses stacked like coasters. Under another, wedding rings sorted by size. Daniel turned when we reached him. "Did my wife send you?" he asked. "No." "Then who invited me?" Nora looked at the folded paper in his hand. "You did." He unfolded it. It was a photograph of a woman and 2 children standing in front of a house with a for sale sign. On the back, printed like a voucher, enough to start over. Financial temptation rarely feels like greed from the inside. It feels like rescue. "I was just going to play one hand," Daniel said. No one laughed. Room 618 was larger than the hotel tower. It held the guest services counter from camera 18, filing cabinets, plastic chairs, wall clocks showing different years, and machines built into every wall. Slots, voucher printers, adding machines, key cutters, time clocks, all clicking together. Ruth Bell sat behind the counter. In person, she shimmered at the edges, but her name tag was clear. Ruth. Armand placed the black chip on the counter. "I kept the balance," he said. "Confirmed," Ruth answered. "Release her." Incorrect form. Nora stepped forward, ink dripping from her sleeves. "Ruth, it's me." The clock mask cracked. Ruth looked at Nora for a long moment, sorting through age. "Nora Keene," she said. Nora nodded. "You owe $17. Table 7. August 14th, 1981. Tips counted short." Nora gave one broken laugh. "Put it on my tab." Ruth stamped a blank page. Armand leaned on the counter. "Take me instead." "Already taken," Ruth said. She slid him a folder. Inside were photographs of Armand at every age since 1981. Laughing at a Christmas party, signing a mortgage, standing beside a grave, sleeping in his office chair. Each image carried a notation: balance accrued, interest applied, promotion accepted, silence retained. The last photograph showed him standing at that very counter, older than he was, mouth open. Status: collected. Ruth lifted her stamp. Armand looked at Nora. "I'm sorry," The stamp came down. He vanished with the sound. No flash, no smoke. One moment he was there. The next, his pit boss jacket hung empty over the velvet rope, name badge swinging. The black chip remained. Ruth pushed it toward me. Next, responsible party. No. She slid out a form bearing my unauthorized signature. Retain balance was checked. A new box waited below it. Accept transfer. I didn't sign that. Pending. I didn't sign it. Security acknowledged party by name. Because I had called Daniel in the old cage. Because the system did not care about intent, only input. I had turned a missing man into an active claim. I looked around for anything in the room that did not belong to the process. That is what security work teaches you. Find the exit. Find the person not moving with the crowd. In a rigged game, find the rule the house forgot it made. The line behind Daniel had stopped. Not because Ruth stopped stamping, because someone near the back refused to move. A child in a red windbreaker. He stood gripping an arcade cup, eyes fixed on the carpet. People behind him waited with the patience of the dead. Ruth ignored him for 8 seconds, then rang her bell. Minor party must be accompanied. The child did not move. Minor party must be accompanied. The machines clicked uncertainly. There. A rule. I found his report in the papers at my feet. Tommy Vale, 9, missing 1986. Last seen. Arcade amount, 25 cents. The monarch had taken a child over a quarter and trapped itself in its own regulation. I stepped out of my lane. The red rope snapped against my waist, but did not stop me. Security, Ruth said. Return to window. I kept walking. Tommy looked up. He could not have been more than 9. His arcade cup rattled in both hands. Your parents here? I asked. He shook his head. Then I'm with you. I took his hand. The room went still. Ruth stood. Until then, I had not known she could. Behind her, filing cabinets opened, every drawer full of keys marked 618. Unauthorized accompaniment. I'm security, I said. Minors need an escort. Security assigned to pending transfer. Pending is not transferred. Nora understood first. She moved to a girl in a denim jacket and took her hand. Luis grabbed the shoulder of a boy in a baseball uniform. Daniel stepped out of line and lifted a toddler who had been standing alone near the plastic chairs. The queue unraveled. Not completely, not cleanly, but enough. The room's system depended on separate claims, individual balances, people alone at windows. It did not know what to do with responsibility that was not financial. Ruth slammed the stamp down. Every machine hit jackpot at once. Keys exploded from trays. Vouchers fired into the air. Bells screamed. Fluorescent lights strobed the room into pieces. Nora shielding the denim jacket girl. Louis dragging 2 people under the rope. Daniel holding the toddler and crying. Ruth behind the counter with her mouth open in terror instead of rage. Behind Ruth, a small door appeared. Employees only. Beyond it was darkness and the sound of the casino floor. I shouted for everyone to move. Ruth did not. For 1 second, she was not a clock, not a ghost, not a system of debt. She was a young cocktail server on an extra shift, holding a black chip, wondering if one small wrong turn might become a better life. Ruth, Nora yelled. Ruth looked at her and said, All payouts final. But she said it like grief. Then every printer in the walls began issuing the same word. Void, void, void. We ran. I kept Tommy's hand in mine. Paper lashed my face. Keys skidded underfoot. The counter split down the middle, revealing not wood or wiring, but stacked reports descending farther than sight. At the threshold, Tommy stopped. "My quarter," he said. "Leave it." It was my dad's. The arcade cup had spilled near the line. I lunged, grabbed 1/4 from the carpet, and felt the room notice. The coin was warm. Ruth screamed, "Balance active!" Nora grabbed my collar and yanked me through the employee door. We came out behind the cashier cage at 3:33 a.m. The casino was dark except for emergency lights and the south wall machines, all smoking softly. Guests stumbled out around us. Not all of them. I will not pretend we saved everyone. Some faces from camera 18 never appeared. Some reports kept printing under locked office doors for hours. But Daniel Harker came out. So did Tommy Vale. So did people who should have been older, or dead, or impossible, standing under red emergency lights while the remaining guests backed away from them in silence. Ruth Bell did not come out. Neither did Armand. The brass elevator doors closed and became the steak night poster again. At 3:41, the phones worked. At 3:45, sheriff's deputies arrived. No official report used the word impossible. They said malfunction, unauthorized access, electrical anomaly, mass confusion, carbon monoxide concern, employee misconduct, legacy system irregularity. They said Daniel Harker wandered into a restricted area during acute stress. They said recovered individuals gave inconsistent identifying information. They photographed the reports, the keys, Armand's empty jacket, and the black chip that reappeared in Desert Queen's tray after the power was cut. Tommy Vale was placed with county services until records could be sorted. His parents were dead. His older sister, 71 years old, drove from Arizona and fainted when she saw him. I watched through a hospital corridor window as he held up the quarter I had brought back. No one asked why it was dated 1999. Daniel refused interviews. His wife arrived before noon. She slapped him, then held him hard enough to bend his gray jacket. In the parking lot, Daniel gave me the photograph voucher. The image had changed. The for sale sign was gone. His family still stood in front of the house, but all the windows were dark, and someone had printed 618 on the front door. "I didn't win anything," he said. "Good. It doesn't feel good. It usually doesn't at first." That was the wisest thing I ever said, and I stole it from Nora. She quit before sunrise. She left $17 in chips on table 7 and walked out through the east doors. The parking lot let her leave. I watched her taillights reach the highway. Louis stayed for his statement, then left security work forever. He called me months later to ask if I ever heard printers at night. I lied and said no. The Monarch closed for investigation, reopened for 6 weeks, then closed forever after a bankruptcy filing that blamed structural hazards and brand damage. A development group bought the property and planned to demolish it. They got through the parking structure, the east entrance, and half the lounge. Then they found the 6th floor, not in the tower, under the casino. A subcontractor cut through concrete behind the old cashier cage and found a corridor with hotel carpet, brass room numbers, and fluorescent lights still on, though power had been disconnected for months. The corridor ran beneath the building in a straight line longer than the property. Every door was marked 618. Work stopped. The property changed hands twice and then stopped changing hands at all. The Monarch is still there, visible from the interstate if you know when to look. Most drivers see only the sign, the crowned woman pouring dead bulbs into the desert. At night, the building should be dark. Sometimes it is. Sometimes one window glows on a floor that is not there. I kept copies of the reports. Not all. Enough. They are in a fire safe under my bed, filed by date because fear did not cure me of procedure. The originals vanished into evidence storage, then a warehouse flood, then the soft graveyard where inconvenient paperwork goes. My copies change. A typo corrects itself. A last seen time moves by a minute. Ruth Bell's status changed from active to unresolved in 2021. Armand Soul's file appeared in my stack, though I never copied it. His amount is not money. It says witness. Mine says pending. I tried burning the files once. The smoke alarm printed an evacuation route to room 618. I tried shredding one. The shredder jammed on a black casino chip. After that, I stopped giving the paperwork new ways to answer me. I'm writing this now because today is May 4th, and every year on this date, something balances. At 2:17 this morning, my home printer turned on. It is not connected to my computer. I keep it unplugged. That did not matter. From the hallway, I heard the old dry cough of a machine producing consequence. When I opened the office door, one page waited in the tray. It was a work order. Monarch Desert Casino. Decommission. Authorization. Machine. DQ-09. Desert Queen. Location. Private residence. Hallway closet. Authorized by Elias Vance. Remove machine. Checked. Retain balance. Checked delivery. Window. May 4th, 2:19. 2 minutes later, my closet light came on. I live in a one-bedroom apartment. The hallway closet is shallow, just enough for coats, a vacuum, and a box of old uniforms. But the light under the door was fluorescent, blue-white, and humming with the patience of a building that knows paperwork can outlive stone. Something inside began to print. I did not open it. I pushed my couch against the closet door, then the kitchen table, then the fire safe with the reports inside. The printer kept chattering, strip after strip sliding beneath the door, each one warm enough to curl. They are not all mine. Some have monarch names. Some are blank with tomorrow's date. One has Nora Keene's name, but the status says, exit confirmed, and I keep that folded in my wallet like a prayer. One has Luis Ortega listed as returned before completion. Good. The newest strip has no name, only a description. Age, unknown. Last seen. Reading file. Location, unspecified reporting. Party, pending distinguishing circumstances. Acknowledged case by continuing. At the bottom, where the amount should be, it says attention. I placed it face down. The closet is still humming. The couch has begun to move by inches, not shoved, but politely adjusted, the way a line makes room for the next guest. Under the door, the glow has sharpened into a perfect rectangle. I can see shadows crossing it from the other side. Feet, perhaps. The legs of a counter. Now there's a bell on my hallway floor. It is small and silver, the kind a clerk taps when stepping away from a desk. Every few minutes, it rings once, though nothing touches it. The last strip to print before dawn was only 4 inches long, the size of an ordinary casino voucher. No barcode, no amount, just one line in faded thermal ink. Please, bring the black chip. I do not have the black chip. That is what I keep telling the door. But every time I say it, something drops into the payout tray inside my closet, and the sound is unmistakable. A single heavy chip settling into metal, waiting for my hand. The waterfall that runs upward after midnight. The first official mention of the waterfall is not in a brochure or a trail map. It is in a maintenance log from Blackpine State Park, dated October 18th, 1987, written by a ranger named Elias Crew. The entry is only 3 lines long. North Fork Trail flooded past Marker 6. Moonstairs Falls, audible from East Road, the wind out of west. Found dead trout in parking lot. Dry gravel beneath them. At the time, Moonstairs Falls was not a destination. It was a place the park inherited when the county line moved, and an old logging tract became public land. The trail to it was badly marked. The bridge below it had washed out twice, and the name was local rather than official. Old-timers said the falls looked like a set of white steps in the moonlight, each drop sliding over a shelf of black stone before plunging into a narrow basin. Children in the nearest town had another name for it. They called it the Backward Falls. Every rural place has a story that gets told with a grin until somebody young enough believes it. The one about Moonstairs Falls was simple. After midnight, if the weather was clear and the creek had been running high for 3 days, the water would stop falling. It would hesitate. Then it would rise. Not spray, not mist. The whole curtain of water would climb the cliff, sheet by sheet, as if the river had remembered a different direction. Anyone standing too close would hear voices in the stone. Anyone foolish enough to answer would be called by name from inside the falls. There was no visitor warning about this, no sign beside the trail. No ranger wanted to be the one who typed "Waterfall may reverse direction after midnight" into a state safety memo. The legend stayed where legends usually survive, in gas station conversations, in dares, in campfire lies, and in the hard quiet between park staff when the radio crackled after dark. For 27 years, nothing about Moonstairs Falls required a case file. Then, in June of 2014, 4 tourists hiked in to film it after midnight, and only 3 walked out. This account is drawn from ranger logs, search team notes, recovered tourist footage, weather records, and interviews conducted later by park investigators. It is a fictional reconstruction of a local horror case file, not a claim of fact. Several names have been changed, but the shape of the event remains uneven, contradictory, and wet in places that should have stayed dry. The group arrived at Blackpine on a Thursday afternoon, the kind of warm, blue day that makes remote parks feel safer than they are. There were 4 of them: Mira Voss, 26, an amateur travel videographer; her younger brother Caleb, 22; Jonah Reed, a sound engineer who carried more microphones than food; and Elise Marlowe, a school teacher from Portland who had known Mira since college. They were not ghost hunters. That point appears several times in Mira's footage. She says it into the camera while sitting on the tailgate of a rented SUV, eating trail mix from the bag. "We are not ghost hunters," she says, laughing. "We are folklore tourists. Big difference. Ghost hunters yell at empty rooms. Folklore tourists get lost with better lighting." Jonah, off camera, says, "Speak for yourself. I plan to yell at least one empty room." The video has the loose warmth of people at the beginning of a trip, before the woods have had time to narrow around them. They film the ranger station, the hand-painted map, the old bell above the door that sounds too bright for the dusty room. They film a wall display about black bears and invasive beetles. They film a carved wooden donation box with a slot worn smooth by decades of coins. At 4:12 p.m., Mira turns the camera toward a bulletin board beside the permit desk. Pinned among notices about fire restrictions and trail closures is a faded photograph of Moonstairs Falls taken in 1971. The water is a pale streak in a dark cleft. There is no fence, no people for scale, just the falls, the rock face, and a smear of white where the basin churns. Someone has written in pencil along the bottom edge of the photo, "Do not listen after midnight." Mira zooms in. "That," she whispers, "is why we drove 6 hours." The ranger on duty that day was Audrey Bell, 9 years with the Park Service, former EMT, known among staff for being patient with lost hikers and impatient with men who ignored weather reports. Her incident statement says she warned the group against a night hike to Moonstairs. Heavy rain earlier that week had raised the creek, and the trail beyond Marker 5 was muddy enough to take a boot. Mira's footage shows the conversation in fragments because the camera is held low. Ranger Bell's voice is clear. "It is not a technical trail," Bell says, "but after dark, it becomes one. Rock shelves, washouts, no cell service. If you want waterfall video, go tomorrow morning." Caleb asks, "Is it true it runs upward?" There is a pause in the audio. Not long enough to be dramatic, just enough to be noticed later. "Water does strange things in wind," Bell says. "No wind tonight," Jonah says. "Then it will probably behave itself." Mira laughs. Ranger Bell does not. At 4:36 p.m., the group signs a day use permit, not an overnight backcountry permit. The listed destination is North Fork Loop. The expected return time is 8:30 p.m. In the margin, Ranger Bell writes, "Asked about Moonstairs. Advised against after dark access." That note would matter later, because at 11:07 p.m., the same rented SUV rolled slowly past the closed gate on an old service road, headlights off, engine in low gear. They were already filming. The first midnight footage is shaky, but usable. The moon is bright enough to flatten the forest into silver and black. Ferns flash along the road edge. Branches scrape the doors with a dry whisper of fingernails on cardboard. Caleb holds the camera from the back seat while Mira drives. "This is irresponsible," Elise says. "This is content," Mira replies. "Those can be the same thing." Jonah is wearing headphones, one ear lifted. His recorder sits on his lap, its small red light blinking. "You hear that?" he asks. No one answers at first. Under the engine and tire noise, the audio picks up a low, steady rush. It could be wind in the trees. It could be distant water. "Falls?" Caleb says. Jonah shakes his head. "We're still 2 miles out." At 11:41 p.m., they park near a blocked service turnout. The North Fork trailhead is a gap in the timber marked by a leaning sign. Someone has carved initials into the post. Someone else, much older or much more careful, has carved a small ladder. Mira films it with her flashlight beam. "Moonstairs," she says. Branding was stronger before the internet. They start hiking at 11:48. For the next 20 minutes, nothing in the footage suggests real danger. They move through bright patches of moonlight and pockets of absolute dark. Their boots sink in mud. Jonah stops twice to record audio. Elise complains about mosquitoes. Caleb asks if anyone else smells pennies. At 12:09 a.m., they reach Marker 5, a metal diamond nailed to a cedar. The trail bends downhill from there toward the gorge. The sound of water fills the audio track, loud enough that voices blur unless the speaker is close to the camera. Then the water stops, not fades, not becomes masked by wind. Stops. The hikers stop too. Mira turns the camera toward the dark ahead. Her flashlight beam catches vapor moving between trees. The gorge is somewhere below them, hidden by trunks. Did that just... Caleb begins. Jonah lifts one hand, asking for quiet. The silence in the footage is not complete. There are insects, a creak of branch, one distant drip, but the continuous roar is gone. Anyone who has stood near a waterfall knows the body adjusts to that force. When it vanishes, the absence feels like pressure. Elise says, "We should go back." Mira whispers, "Wait." At 12:10 a.m., the roar returns, but wrong. The best way investigators described it was that the sound seemed to come from above before it came from ahead. The group looks up together. Leaves tremble, though there is no wind. Droplets begin striking the canopy from underneath. Caleb wipes his face. "Is it raining?" Jonah says, very softly. "No." The camera pans down. The muddy trail shines. Small beads of water are rising out of the footprints they just made. They gather into trembling globes, lift an inch, then fall apart upward into mist. Mira says something that the audio does not catch. It may be a prayer. It may be Caleb's name. They keep going. This decision became the first argument in every later review of the incident. Why continue when the phenomenon had already begun? Why not retreat? But in the footage, the answer is uncomfortably human. None of them is screaming. None of them is being chased. They are frightened, yes, but also amazed. The danger has not yet chosen a shape, and the path is only a path. It points forward. At 12:18 a.m., the trees open onto Moonstairs Falls. The falls drop through a cleft in a cliff face about 70 feet high, tiered by natural shelves of dark basalt. In daytime, according to older photographs, the creek spills over each ledge before falling into a round plunge pool. A cave mouth sits behind the lower curtain, usually invisible except in low water. The trail ends on a gravel bar beside the pool, with a rusted cable fence half buried in moss. In Mira's midnight footage, the waterfall is running upward. The pool boils without splashing over its banks. White water lifts from the basin in a wide sheet, climbs the cliff in rippling folds, strikes each ledge from below, then gathers itself and surges higher. The motion is too smooth to be wind. It has the terrible patience of machinery. Moonlight catches the upward water and makes it look less like liquid than like glass being pulled into the sky. For 19 seconds, no one speaks. Then Caleb laughs once, hard and panicked. "There it is," Mira says. Her voice is not triumphant. It is small. Jonah steps closer with his recorder extended. Elise grabs his sleeve. "Don't. I need the sound." "You have the sound." He does, but the sound is not what anyone expected. The waterfall is not roaring. It is inhaling. The audio track contains a long reverse rush, a drawn breath through stone, layered with faint clicks, like pebbles knocking together inside a pipe. Under that, almost too low to hear, are voices. The first voice says, "Cold." All four hear it. You can tell because the camera shifts as Mira turns toward the others. Caleb's mouth is open. Elise has one hand pressed to her throat. Jonah stares at the recorder as if it has spoken from his palm. The voice comes again, clearer. "Cold under the steps." The words do not echo. They arrive dry and close, as if spoken into someone's ear. Mira says, "Who is that?" The waterfall pulls itself upward. The cave mouth behind the lower shelf appears, black and wet and perfectly round, like an eye opening behind a curtain. A second voice speaks from inside it. "Mira!" There's no doubt about the name. It is on the audio. It is also the moment the footage changes from curiosity to incident. Mira lowers the camera. The frame catches only the gravel, her boots, and a line of water lifting off the stones in thin vertical threads. Caleb says, "No, no, absolutely not." Jonah whispers, "It knows your name." Elise says, "Mira, back up." Mira does not move. Her breathing is loud against the microphone. The cave says, "Mira, I found the way through." Later, Mira would tell investigators that the voice belonged to their mother, who had died 12 years earlier of an aneurysm in a grocery store. Caleb refused to listen to that portion of the file. He confirmed only that it sounded like her if she had been underwater and smiling. The camera rises again. Mira takes one step toward the pool. Caleb pushes in front of her. "That's not Mom." The cave says, "Caleb, sweetheart." He makes a sound that has no word in it. Elise reaches for Mira's backpack strap and pulls. Mira resists for half a second, then stumbles backward. Jonah has moved to the side, closer to the rusted fence, holding his recorder high. "There are multiple voices," he says. "I can hear." The rest is lost under a sudden crack from the cliff. A slab of water detaches from the upward fall and bends toward him. It should collapse. It should spray. Instead, it holds its shape, like a clear arm reaching out of the main curtain. Jonah backs away too late. The water wraps around his right wrist. He does not scream. That is one of the worst details. He gasps, looks down, and says, "It's warm." Then the water pulls. The camera jerks as everyone lunges. Elise catches Jonah's belt. Caleb grabs Elise. Mira drops the flashlight, and for a few seconds, the footage becomes a chaos of moonlit gravel, shoes, hands, and the impossible vertical shine of water tugging a grown man toward the pool. Jonah says, "Let go." Elise shouts, "No." Jonah says it again, calmer. "Let go. It has my watch." His watch had been a waterproof field watch with a canvas strap. Searchers later found it in his tent, dry, ticking, on top of his sleeping bag. At the falls, in the footage, it is still visible on his wrist, under the transparent coil of water. Caleb kicks at the water. His boot passes through it and comes out dry. Jonah's arm disappears to the elbow. He begins to slide across the gravel, not into the pool, but upward, as if the grip has changed direction. His feet leave the ground. Elise loses her hold. Caleb falls backward. Mira screams his name. The sheet of water lifts Jonah into the lower curtain and folds over him. For one frame, less than a blink, his face is visible behind the climbing water. His eyes are open. His mouth forms a word. Then he is gone. The waterfall continues upward. The remaining footage after Jonah's disappearance lasts 9 minutes and 14 seconds. It is difficult to watch because it contains all the useless motions people make after reality has broken. They shout into the cave. They throw rocks. Caleb wades into the edge of the pool and nearly falls when the surface sucks at his knees without wetting his pants. Elise keeps saying, "We saw it. We saw it," as if witness itself can bargain. At 12:31 a.m., Jonah's voice comes from the cave. "I'm behind it." Mira sobs once. Caleb says, "Don't answer." "There's a passage," Jonah says. "I can see daylight." Elise says, "It is midnight. I can see all of you from the dry side." That sentence stops them. Mira points the camera at the cave mouth. Behind the upward sheet, something pale moves. It might be Jonah's hand. It might be water striking stone. The voice calls again, but this time it is not only Jonah. Several voices speak with him, layered exactly, their words landing in unison. Come in before it falls. At 12:34 a.m., the waterfall drops. No warning, no slow weakening. It simply remembers gravity. Thousands of gallons slam down into the pool with a concussive roar. The camera overloads with white noise. Spray blasts the lens. Mirror falls. The image turns sideways. When the frame clears, the cave is hidden again. Jonah is gone. The 3 survivors left the gorge at 12:46 a.m. They ran badly. Caleb vomited twice. Elise lost one shoe. Mira kept the camera recording, though for long stretches it shows only darkness bouncing in front of her and the silver smear of the trail. At marker 5, the footage catches a detail investigators did not understand for weeks. There's a line of wet footprints crossing the trail from east to west. The prints are bare, adult-sized, and moving uphill. They cross directly over the group's own muddy boot tracks, but the trail around them is dry. Each print shines with water for a second, then sinks upward into the air, vanishing toe first. Caleb sees them. "Don't look," he says. Mira looks. From somewhere off trail, Jonah's voice says, "My feet are cold." The camera cuts out at 1:03 a.m. Ranger Bell found the 3 survivors at 2:17 a.m. near the locked service gate. Her log describes them as hypothermic despite the warm night, disoriented, and smelling strongly of river water. This last detail bothered her because all 3 were dry. Their clothes were not damp. Their hair was not wet. Mira's camera worked. Caleb's socks were dry inside his boots. Elise's remaining shoe was dusty. Yet Ranger Bell wrote that the smell in the patrol truck became so strong, she rolled down the windows. At the station, while waiting for county deputies, Bell laid 3 wool blankets over them. Within 5 minutes, the blankets were soaked through. Water dripped from the edges onto the floor. The survivors remained dry beneath them. The first search began at dawn. Blackpine did not have a large staff. By 6 a.m., the search party included 4 rangers, 2 county deputies, 6 volunteer rescuers, and a dog handler named Louis Harter. They took the North Fork Trail under a sky the color of tin. At Moonstairs Falls, they found no Jonah. They found his recorder placed upright on a flat stone, dry on the outside, with water pooled inside the memory card slot. They found Mira's flashlight at the pool, wet around the casing, dry and warm inside the battery chamber. Harter's dog followed Jonah's scent to the gravel bar, faced the falls, and lay flat with his muzzle pressed between his paws. He would not move closer to the cave. The cave behind the falls became the focus. During normal flow, rescuers could edge behind the lower curtain from the left. The passage was shallow, about 12 feet deep, and ended in a slick wall of black stone. There was no daylight, no tunnel, no gap large enough for a person to crawl through. Yet the cave floor was covered in pale dry sand. In the sand were bare footprints, adult-sized and overlapping, coming out of the back wall and stopping at the wet lip where the waterfall struck. One set was small, possibly a child. Another had a dragging mark beside it, as if the walker had pulled a length of rope or a limp hand. Ranger Bell noticed the back wall was dry enough to hold dust. She touched it with 2 fingers and later said it felt warm, like a rock that had been sitting in sun. When she leaned close, someone inside the wall whispered, "Audrey." The official search lasted 6 days. Divers checked the 9-foot plunge pool and found only branches, fishing line, a rusted trap, old beer cans, and a set of car keys belonging to no vehicle in the lot. A rope team searched the cliff above the falls and found no sign Jonah had climbed or been carried there. On the third night, rain moved through. Bell and Ranger Thomas Arlen sat in a patrol truck at the North Fork trailhead to keep curiosity seekers out. At 12:03 a.m., the rain began falling upward only in the headlights. Jonah's voice called from beyond the locked gate. "I found the day side." While Bell radioed dispatch, a person-shaped dry place appeared on the trail, rain lifting around its outline without touching it. The voice said, "Tell Mira I kept recording." Then the outline stepped backward into the trees. At the same moment, every paper map inside the ranger station became wet, the water spreading from the printed point where Moonstairs Falls should have been. Day 4 brought the tourist footage review. Mira had resisted turning over her camera because the last clear image of Jonah had become an object she could not surrender. Eventually, Caleb convinced her. Bell, Arlen, Hask, and a state investigator named Lenore Pike watched the files in the park office. The footage showed what the survivors described. It also showed more. A hand pressed out through solid stone behind the upward water. The pool reflected a daytime basin under a white sky, crowded with figures in canvas jackets and long dark skirts, all staring down as if watching the hikers from below. A fish appeared beside Mira's boot on dry gravel, gills working, then vanished in the next frame. At 12:33:58, 4 seconds before the waterfall dropped, Jonah appeared behind Mira. He stood 6 feet back, dry and uninjured, facing away from the camera with one arm raised toward the trail. His boots were missing. His feet were bare and wet. The search area expanded. Teams moved downstream, then beyond the park boundary. They checked abandoned logging roads, culverts, hunting cabins, and a limestone quarry where teenagers sometimes camped. Flyers went up in Blackpine, Cedarvale, and the gas stations along Route 19. The rented SUV was processed. Jonah's tent was opened. Inside, as noted earlier, searchers found his watch. It lay on top of his sleeping bag, ticking normally, canvas strap dry, face unscratched. The watch showed 12:31 a.m., though the actual time was 4:18 p.m. When Deputy Hask picked it up, the second hand began moving backward. He dropped it. It struck the tent floor and stopped at exactly midnight. Mira saw the watch and collapsed. Caleb became angry in the way frightened people become angry when anger is the only door left in the room. He accused the Rangers of moving it. He accused Jonah of staging something. He accused Mira of making them go. Then he walked out of the campground and sat on the road shoulder until dusk. Elise stopped speaking for almost a full day. On the 5th night, she gave Ranger Bell a detail she had been holding back. While they were running from the falls, just before marker 5, she had felt someone take her missing shoe off, not pull it, not snag it in mud. Fingers had touched her ankle with great care, untied the lace, and slipped the shoe away. "I thought, if I looked down," Elise said, "there would be someone crawling behind me." Her shoe was found the next morning in the cave behind the falls. It was placed upright on the dry sand, toe pointed toward the back wall. Inside was Jonah's missing memory card from his recorder. The one recovered on day 1, the wet one, was still in evidence. This second card was dry. Its contents were worse. The first file was ordinary field audio from earlier in the trip. Birds, creek sound, Mira laughing at a bad joke. The second began at 12:18 a.m. at the falls, matching the camera footage. For several minutes it captured the upward water and voices. Then Jonah vanished. The recorder should have been on the gravel bar after that. Searchers found it there. But the audio continued from somewhere else. At 12:31 a.m., Jonah is breathing hard. Water sounds close, but muted, as if heard through a wall. His first words are, "The cave is bigger on this side." He does not sound injured. He sounds stunned. "I can see the pool," he says. "I can see them. Mira, don't come in. If this plays, don't come in." There's a scraping sound, footsteps on sand. "There are stairs," he says. "They go up behind the falls." "No, not up. I don't know." Every step is wet and dry at the same time. For 40 seconds, he walks. The audio captures his breathing, the soft crunch of sand, and a distant roar that pulses like blood in an ear. Then another voice speaks. "Jonah Reed." Jonah stops. "Who's there?" "You brought your listening box." "Where am I?" "Under where the water remembers." The voice is difficult to categorize. It is neither male nor female, neither old nor young. It seems assembled from many people, saying the same words at slightly different distances. Pike's notes describe it as a choir trying to imitate a single throat. Jonah says, "I need to get back. Back is above." "Above what?" "Above midnight." There is a wet laugh, not cruel, almost fond. Jonah begins walking again faster. His breath sharpens. "I can see light," he says. There's a river over my head. No, under. God, I don't." He breaks off. In the background, faint but clear, Mira's voice calls his name. Then Caleb's. Then Elisa's. They are the real voices from the tourist footage, delayed by perhaps a minute. Jonah hears them from the other side of the waterfall. "I'm here," he shouts. On Mira's camera, around the same moment, Jonah's voice says, "I'm behind it." The two recordings do not align perfectly. Jonah's shouted words on the memory card are desperate, distant, and echoing. The voice on Mira's camera is calm and close. Pike marked this in the transcript with a single line, possible duplication or mimicry. The audio continues. Jonah runs. The recorder bumps against his jacket. The sand under his feet becomes stone. The roar grows louder, then suddenly stops. He whispers, "There are people in the wall." Another voice says, "We are not in the wall." "Then where are you?" "Where the water put us down." Jonah says, "How long have you been here?" Several voices answer at once. "Since the bridge broke." "Since the mule path." "Since the girl with the red pail." "Since Elias looked away." "Since before the park had a name." Jonah's breathing becomes ragged. "What do you want?" The answer comes from very close to the microphone. "A witness who will listen all the way down." The file then fills with a tone so low it vibrated the laptop speakers and made everyone in the office feel pressure behind their eyes. Hask shut the volume off. The waveform continued on screen as a thick black band. At 12:46 a.m., Jonah speaks again. It opens when the fall climbs. It closes when it remembers. "If you are hearing me, do not." He pauses. "Mira?" The voice he hears is not captured clearly. It may be Mira. It may be his own voice, reversed. Jonah says, "No, you are not her." There's a splash. He screams once, not in pain, but in surprise. Then he says, quietly, "My feet are cold." The recording ends at 1:03 a.m., the same minute Mira's camera cut out. The final file on the card was dated 6 days later. No one could explain how. The card had been found that morning. It had not left evidence custody except for copying. Yet a file appeared with a timestamp of June 17th, 12 a.m. a date still 1 day in the future at the time of review. Pike ordered everyone out of the room before playing it. Bell stayed. Hask refused to leave. Arlen stood in the doorway. The recording contains only waterfall noise for 3 minutes. At the end, Ranger Bell's voice says, "I hear you." Bell insisted she had not said those words. The others in the room confirmed she had been silent, but the voice was hers. Older, perhaps. Tired. Wet. The search was suspended on June 17th at 6 p.m. The official reason was lack of further evidence and unsafe terrain conditions. Unofficially, the park superintendent had received too many reports from exhausted searchers who heard family members calling from drainages, saw wet handprints appear on dry truck windows, or found river stones in their boots after removing them in sealed tents. Moonstairs Falls was closed indefinitely. Closure did not end the case, but the reports after that became smaller and harder to file. Campers heard wet, bare feet outside dry tents. A maintenance worker found Jonah's headphone cord wrapped around the old cable fence, sun-bleached and brittle. Ranger Arlen resigned in September after the station sinks began to drain upward at midnight, each pipe holding a clear column of water 3 inches high, while a voice called his full name from the closed restroom. Ranger Bell stayed until winter. Her last log entry about Moonstairs is dated December 2nd, 2014. Snow on North Fork by Marker 3. Falls audible from station at 0010. No open water on trail. Found wet sand under office door. Do not answer. She transferred to a desert park the following spring. Mira, Caleb, and Elise handled the aftermath differently. Elise moved inland and refused interviews after the first year. Caleb became obsessed with the one-frame image of Jonah behind Mira, then stopped after seeing a blurred woman near the tree line wearing their mother's old raincoat. Mira kept making videos, but never about folklore. Her channel shifted to empty beaches, roadside diners, and trains crossing plains at dusk. Viewers noticed she avoided waterfalls. If a fountain appeared in a city square, she cut away before the water fell. In 2016, she sent investigator Pike a hard drive containing unused Moonstairs footage. In the note, she wrote, "I thought I had watched everything. I was wrong. There is a clip from before we reached the falls. I do not remember filming it. Please do not send it back." The clip is 42 seconds long. It shows the North Fork Trail at night from a stationary camera position. No one is holding the camera. The group can be heard approaching from behind, laughing quietly, minutes before they reached marker 5. The lens points toward a shallow puddle in the trail. In the puddle's reflection, the waterfall is visible. It is running upward. Standing in front of it are 4 people with their backs to the camera. Mira, Caleb, Elise, and Jonah. They are not moving. They are waiting for themselves to arrive. Pike made a private note after reviewing the clip. The phenomenon may not be bound to location in the ordinary sense. It may use water surfaces as receiving points. It may also precede observation. That line was never included in the public file. By then, Blackpine State Park had already removed Moonstairs Falls from printed maps. The trail remained physically present, but its sign was taken down, its first bridge dismantled, and its parking turnout blocked with boulders. Locals still knew the way. Some hiked in during the day. A few returned with photographs showing ordinary water and an ordinary gorge. Others returned early, pale, saying the trail had become wet in a perfect line ahead of them, as if someone invisible were dragging a soaked rope through the dust. One hunter claimed he saw the falls in November from a ridge half a mile away. There was no water coming down. Instead, a white column rose from the basin into low clouds, and inside the column were dark shapes moving upward slowly, like people climbing stairs. He watched until one shape stopped and turned its head. Through binoculars, at that distance, he saw Jonah Reed's face. The hunter never returned to Blackpine. The most troubling material in the Moonstairs file is not the tourist footage or the impossible recordings. It is how far back the small signs go. Once Pike requested every archived mention of North Fork hydrology, the old logs changed shape. The 1987 dead trout entry was one. There were also notes about a child hearing a school bell inside the falls, wet handprints on the underside of dry bridge planks, a lost hiker following his dead wife's voice toward the gorge, and a wildlife recorder capturing whispers between midnight and 12:11 a.m. One phrase appeared twice, 7 years apart. Elias, look. Elias Crew died in 2010, 4 years before Jonah vanished. Pike interviewed his widow, Mara, in Cedar Vale. Mara told her about a boy named Samuel Dane, 13 years old, who disappeared behind Moonstairs Falls in 1962, before the land became a park. Elias had been 17 then, one of the searchers. According to Mara, he touched the dry back wall of the cave and heard Samuel crying from the other side, begging him to dig. But the wall was stone, Mara said, so Elias stepped away. Pike asked if Elias ever went back after midnight. Mara looked toward the kitchen sink. Once, she said. No more. That one word may explain why Crew kept working Blackpine for decades. It may also explain an undated winter photograph found in his garage after Mara died. It shows Moonstairs Falls rising upward between frozen ledges. At the bottom, on the gravel bar, Ranger Elias Crew stands beside a teenage boy in a wool cap. Both face the falls. The boy's bare feet are wet. Pike, retired by then, refused to comment publicly. Privately, she wrote a final memo and sent it to the park superintendent. The memo recommended that Moonstairs Falls remain unmapped, that all trail access be physically removed rather than merely discouraged, and that staff avoid recording audio within 1 mile of the basin after dusk. Her conclusion was careful but clear. Moonstairs is not simply a site of anomalous hydrology. The falls appear to create or expose a threshold state in which water, time, and witness memory become unstable. The upward flow is likely not the event itself, but the visible symptom of an opening. Voices associated with the opening imitate the missing, but may also include the missing. Do not attempt retrieval by response. The superintendent wrote one sentence below it. How do you close water? The answer, of course, is that you cannot. You can close a trail. You can pull a bridge. You can remove a name from a map until only the locals remember where to point. You can lock evidence in metal cabinets and mark footage as restricted. You can tell seasonal rangers the North Fork Gorge is unstable, which is true enough. But water travels. It beads on tent fabric. It gathers under office doors. It hides in pipes and canteens and the dark throats of drains. It waits in the bottom of a boot that was dry a minute ago. It can hold a voice without keeping a body. It can reflect a place before you reach it. On the last page of the case file is a still image from Mira's recovered clip, the one with the puddle, the one where 4 figures stand in the reflection at the base of the upward waterfall. For years, that was believed to be the final image, Then, during digitization, a technician brightened the frame. Behind the 4 waiting figures, inside the black circle of the cave, there is a 5th shape. It is hard to see at first because it is not standing in the reflected moonlight. It is just inside the darkness, where the dry sand begins. It appears to be a man on his knees. His hands are pressed flat against the invisible surface between the cave and the world. His head is bowed as if listening to something below him. Around his wrists, water hangs in clear loops, rising and falling without touching the ground. The technician thought it was Jonah. Pike, when shown the enhancement, said no. Jonah had been taller. Jonah had worn a hooded jacket. Jonah had vanished barefoot. This man wore an old ranger coat. On the enlarged image, the patch on his shoulder is just clear enough to read, Blackpine Park Service. One hand is lifted, palm outward, not waving, not warning, simply pressed there as if the stone has softened for him at last. Beyond him, deeper in the cave that should have ended after 12 feet, a staircase of wet black rock climbs into daylight, and on the lowest step, where the upward water thins to glass, a line of bare footprints waits, filling one by one from underneath. Case file alert. The Lunar sample started growing hair. The first note in case file 24 was written on yellow inventory paper. It said, sample displays filament activity. The second note, stapled below it, was written by another hand. Do not call it hair in reports. Everyone obeyed that instruction in the official documents. It was not hair. It was fibrous emergence. It was an unidentified surface filament. It was a biosignature adjacent artifact with no confirmed biological origin. It was probable contamination until further review. But inside quarantine room 6, behind 2 panes of glass and a door that sealed with a slow pneumatic sigh, it looked like hair. It grew from a rock that had never touched earth air. That was the part nobody could make smaller. The sample was listed as LS77B, a black basalt chip no larger than a child's tooth. It had been stored for 48 years in Basement Archive C of the fictional Lunar Materials Annex, locked inside a steel cylinder under dry nitrogen. Its origin field contained the phrase that had followed it through every audit: origin uncertain, chain incomplete. For decades, that was enough to keep LS77B ignored. It was too questionable for display, too interesting to destroy, and too administratively awkward to reclassify. Every few years, someone requested new testing. Every few years, the request died under the same problem. Nobody could prove where the fragment had come from. Then the biosignature survey began. The survey was not about aliens. The file says this 3 times, as if repetition could keep panic behind a locked door. It was about contamination. Modern instruments had become sensitive enough to detect glove oils, cardboard fibers, old adhesive, skin flakes, and cleaning residue on legacy samples. The annex wanted to know which archive materials could still be trusted. So, on October 8th, 2025, LS77B was brought upstairs in a sealed transfer cask. The hallway camera showed 2 technicians, Alvarez and Pat, walking beside the cart. Archivist Mara Venn followed with the original custody binder. At the door to quarantine room 6, Alvarez stopped and checked the cast display. He told the others it was warm, not hot, not alarming, 2 degrees above room temperature. It had been cold when it left the basement. They entered anyway. Quarantine room 6 was an honest room. Pale green tile, stainless counters, laminar hood, glove ports, fluorescent lights. There was nowhere for a secret to stand. At 0931, LS-77B was opened inside the isolation hood. The ampule seal was intact. The inner atmosphere was stable. The basalt chip lay in its small cradle, triangular, dull on one side and glassy on the other. Mara read the old tag for the camera. Sample LS-77B, unverified returned mineral fragment. Do not expose outside inert atmosphere. At 9:46, Alvarez cut the ampule. The first surprise was the smell. There should not have been one. The hood atmosphere was nitrogen. The technicians were sealed out by gloves. The exhaust line ran through filters and sensors. No path existed for odor to reach a human nose. Still, both technicians reported wet dust. Mara described it as a cellar after rain. The environmental log recorded nothing. No organics, no sulfur, no ammonia, no volatile spike. The machines insisted there had been no smell. The people stepped back anyway. For 4 minutes, the sample looked ordinary except for a pale line along its broken edge, like a scratch packed with frost. The team photographed it under white light, raking light, and ultraviolet. At 10:03, the line moved. In the printed stills attached to the file, the change is almost too small to trust. At 10:03:12, the pale line is flush with the rock. At 10:03:28, it is lifted by less than a millimeter. At 10:04:02, it is separated into individual strands. Fine, colorless, curving toward the nearest glove. Alvarez said, "Is that ice?" It was not ice. The room was dry. The sample was dry. Thermography showed no cooling or condensation. The strands continued to extend. Mara made the first incident entry at 10:06. Unidentified filament, emergence from exposed fracture plane. Growth rate visible under magnification. Recommend pause and isolate. The word growth was circled later by 3 reviewers. At 10:08, Quarantine Room 6 entered soft lock. Soft lock meant nobody left, but nobody panicked. The door sealed. The hood pressure adjusted. The director was notified. The sample stayed under observation. By 10:22, the filaments were 3 millimeters long. By 10:40, they had begun to darken. That was when the room changed. Not physically. The air pressure held. The lights did not flicker. No alarm sounded. But everyone inside reported a sudden awareness of the moon. Those exact words appear in 2 interviews. An awareness of the moon. It was mid-morning in Texas in the fictional record. The moon was below the horizon. The room had no windows, yet Mara said she could feel it above her left shoulder, enormous and close, as if the roof had been removed and the sky lowered to the ceiling tiles. Pat said the room was falling. At 10:47, a cart passed in the hallway. Its wheels clicked over a tile joint. On the magnified feed, every filament leaned toward the sound, not drifting, not shaking, attending. The director, Dr. Renwick Hale, arrived behind the observation glass and began asking for explanations. Glove integrity, air samples, cleaning logs, textile sources, mop fibers, lens wipes, hair coverings, any contaminant that could make the white line ordinary. The first theory was human hair. It failed quickly. The filaments had no medulla, no cuticle scale pattern, no pigment, no keratin response. They were too thin at the base and too uniform along the length. Under polarized light, they split illumination strangely, neither glass nor plastic nor fiber. The second theory was fungus. It lasted longer because everyone wanted it to be true. Fungus belonged to Earth. Fungus could survive negligence. Fungus could embarrass an archive without changing the shape of the universe. But the chamber had no water activity. The filaments did not branch. They showed no spores, no cell walls, no DNA amplification, no protein, no lipid staining. When one strand was clipped and sealed in a secondary dish, it curled into a ring and tightened until it touched itself. At 12:16, the clipped strand began to grow again, not from the cut end, from the curve. A pale fuzz rose along the outside of the ring, evenly spaced, like a field turning upright after wind. Bart whispered, "It remembers where surface is." That sentence does not appear in the official log. Mara wrote it in the margin of her notebook. At 12:30, the annex contacted the Orbital Materials Coordination Office, a records group responsible for old satellite panels, return calibration parts, dust traps, and objects no museum wanted to explain. OMCO sent 2 people that afternoon. Dr. Seye Okonkwo was a contamination specialist, famous for proving extraordinary signals were usually dirty tweezers. Eli Mercer was an observatory liaison with a tablet full of sky logs and the quiet manner of someone who did not like being right. Okonkwo asked for every instrument reading since the ampule cut. Mercer asked what direction the filaments were leaning. That question stopped the room. At 15:18, the sample stage was rotating for imaging. The strands did not hang downward or point toward light, heat, air, static charge, or the nearest human body. They pointed west-northwest. The bearing held as the stage turned beneath them. Mercer checked the building coordinates against orbital data. The moon was still below the horizon, but an old relay satellite, Crescent 9, was passing west-northwest. It was a retired mapping platform that still sent occasional housekeeping bursts. Decades earlier, it had carried a dust exposure panel made from materials similar to those used in old sample ampules. Mercer said Crescent 9 had broadcast at 15:17, 1 minute before the filaments adjusted. Hale said, "Coincidence?" Okonkwo said, "Probably." Mara watched the strands lean toward a satellite nobody inside the room had mentioned. That night, Quarantine Room 6 stayed lit while the rest of the annex went to emergency mode. LS-77. B sat beneath the microscope, its fracture plane furred with a pale fringe turning gray. The longest strands were 9 millimeters. At 22:11, the sample responded to recorded audio. A technician in the observation bay replayed the morning footage to check the timeline. The clip included Alvarez asking, "Is that ice?" On the live feed, the filaments leaned toward the speaker. He paused the video. They held. He replayed the phrase. They leaned again. Okonkwo ran a rough acoustic control series. Most sounds did nothing. 3 produced response. Alvarez's voice, a 1970s capsule recovery beacon, and a faint carrier tone buried under static in the training video. Mercer isolated the tone and compared it to observatory archives. It matched Crescent 9 with intolerance. No one used the word exactly after that. At 0:34, Quarantine Room 6 entered hard lock. Hard lock meant the people came out through decontamination. The room stayed sealed, and LS-77B was no longer treated as a suspicious rock. It became a live containment object. Mara was cleared after 2 showers, nasal swabs, and a 40-minute interview in which she was asked whether she had ever handled antique brushes, wool felt, meteorites, moldy books, or biological specimens. She answered yes to moldy books. The interviewer underlined it, as if that could save them. By morning, every loose object from Quarantine Room 6 had been bagged. The gloves were cut from the ports. The wipes were sealed. The floor drain was capped. Air filters were scanned strand by strand. No source was found. The impossible contamination chain became the center of the case. For contamination to explain LS-77B, it had to pass through an intact ampule, survive decades in vacuum or near vacuum, remain undetected, activate in dry nitrogen, produce non-biological filaments, respond to sound and satellite telemetry, and emerge from inside a basalt fracture without leaving residue in the container. Okonkwo's preliminary report said, no demonstrated contamination path accounts for observed behavior. At 9 o'clock on the second day, the sample was moved to Imaging Bay 2 inside a sealed portable tunnel. The hallway camera showed the cart gliding between white-suited staff. Inside its dome, LS-77B's filaments leaned ahead of the cart. At each intersection, before the cart turned, the strands bent toward the direction it would take. The official explanation was airflow or magnetic field variation. Mara's private note was shorter. It knows the route. Imaging Bay 2 had better microscopes and worse atmosphere, larger room, colder light, more cameras. At 10:26, the scanning electron microscope produced the first close image of a filament. It was not a tube. It was not a fiber. It was a stack of overlapping scales around a hollow dark center. Everyone thought of hair and carefully did not say it. The scales were geometric, nested in repeating angles that changed depending on magnification. At low scale, they resembled plates. At higher scale, each plate held smaller plates. When the electron beam lingered, the filament contracted. When the beam moved away, it relaxed. A severing test was approved at 11:10. One filament was clipped near the base with a diamond microknife and transferred to a quartz slide. The cut on the sample sealed at once by folding its scales inward until the surface became smooth. For 13 seconds, the severed piece lay still. Then it rolled toward LS-77B. The slide was level. The chamber was isolated. There was no airflow or charge strong enough to move it. The filament rolled, stopped at the edge, and lifted its cut end into the air, toward the rock. Mara, watching from the archive desk feed, wrote another note she did not submit. The hair misses the head. That afternoon, the first personnel symptom appeared. Pat reported dust on his tongue. His respirator seal had tested clean. His blood work was normal. At 16:12, he asked whether anyone else could hear scratching. Nobody could. At 16:40, Alvarez heard it too. They described it independently as fingernails on paper. It seemed louder near sealed sample cabinets and stopped whenever someone opened a door. Mercer compared the scratching periods with observatory logs. They matched Crescent 9 telemetry bursts within seconds. Again, coincidence appeared in reports. Again, it looked weaker every time someone typed it. By the third day, LS-77B had produced enough filaments to form a soft halo around the fracture plane. The longest strands were 2 centimeters. They no longer pointed in one direction. They arranged themselves in shallow waves that changed every few minutes. At 3:17, the filaments lifted together and held at a 42-degree angle. At 3:17, an optical survey telescope logged a brief glint near the lunar limb. At 3:18, a radio telescope flagged a narrowband chirp, and discarded it as interference. At 3:18, Crescent 9 failed to answer a routine ping. The data proved nothing. That was the cruelty of it. Each point alone was weak. Together, they made a shape no one wanted to describe. That evening, OMCO sent digitized photos of the old Crescent 9 dust exposure panel. In a 1981 image, one corner of the panel showed a pale smudge near a screw head. It had been labeled lint or developer error. Mercer enlarged it too far. The smudge became a fan of tiny lines. Okonkwo warned him that image artifacts were not evidence. He opened a second photograph from a different angle. The fan was still there. In both images, the lines pointed toward the sky. The storage vault holding the actual panel was locked down at 1902. At 1918, a guard at that vault reported a soft brushing sound from inside. Case file 24 becomes frightening here because the reports remain dry while the events begin arranging themselves like scenes. A sealed sample grows fibers in Texas. A retired satellite misses pings above Earth. A storage vault listens to its own cabinets. Marven sits at her desk, trying to read the first 48 years of a misfiled stone. She found the missing line at 2136. It was not in the official chain. It was in a carbon copy folded into the back of the binder. The copy listed LS77B under a different temporary identifier: Lunar Return Demo, Biological Exclusion Control. For 6 minutes, that made everyone breathe. A biological exclusion control was supposed to be a blank object sent through recovery to measure Earth contamination. If LS77B was a control, then it had never been lunar. Then Mara turned the carbon copy over. On the reverse, written in blue pencil, was a note from an unknown technician. Control replaced after capsule breach. Original blank lost. Use black fragment for seal test. Do not document until source resolved. LS77. B had not been the control. It had replaced the control after something went wrong. No record said where the black fragment came from. At 22:04, the filament halo changed color. Ink darkening climbed from base to tip. The strands thickened and split at their ends into finer fibers. Under magnification, each tip opened into 3 hooks, so small they seemed drawn rather than grown. Okonkwo requested a thermal purge. The chamber was raised in increments: 40 Celsius, 60, 80. The filaments tightened, but did not char. At 120, they sank into the fracture line. For 23 minutes, LS77B looked ordinary. Then the filaments re-emerged from the unbroken glassy side. Not the fracture, the smooth basalt face. They came through stone as if the surface had remembered holes. Nobody mentioned fungus again. Overnight, the sample was observed in darkness, no visible light, infrared only. Radio shielding increased. The stage was grounded and mechanically isolated. At 1:09, infrared video recorded the filaments braiding. 3 strands leaned together, twisted once, separated, and held. Then another 3. Then another. Over 2 hours, the halo organized into a flattened pattern. It looked random until Mercer rotated the image. Then it resembled a crater map. The log calls it topographic resemblance. Mercer compared it against lunar elevation data and found no match. At 4:22, Mara suggested checking pre-impact geometry. The pattern matched a far side basin before a known impact event. An old shape. That was when the case stopped feeling like discovery and started feeling like interruption. On the 4th morning, Hale convened a closed review. The word extraterrestrial never appears in the transcript. The word non-terrestrial appears once and is struck through. Okonkwo argued for extreme containment and off-site destructive testing. She did not claim LS-77B was alive. She said it was active, responsive, and capable of spreading by contact with related materials. Mercer argued for continuous orbital correlation. Mara argued for archival reconstruction. She said the sample had been misunderstood because everyone kept forcing it into categories that made storage easier. Hale asked the question they had avoided. Can it leave the rock? At 9:52, the secondary dish answered. The severed filament ring had grown a pale mat across the quartz. One edge lifted. A fiber touched the dish surface and left behind a dot. The dot spread like frost on glass. At 10:05, the dot produced filaments of its own. The sample could leave the rock. Hard lock expanded to the entire wing. Phones were collected because panic travels faster than facts and leaves better copies. Staff were told there had been a containment irregularity involving legacy material. Some stayed calm. Some cried in stairwells. A junior analyst asked if this was about aliens and was told, truthfully, that nobody knew what it was about. The plan was to transfer LS-77B to the subsurface isolation facility, a windowless bunker below grade. Its instruments were fewer but less connected to anything else. At 12:17, before the transfer, Mara found hair in the binder. Not on it. In it. Between 2 pages of the original custody record lay 3 black filaments pressed flat along the gutter. The binder had never entered the hood or touched the sample chamber. It had been held outside quarantine in ordinary offices and storage rooms. Mara did not touch the strands. Portable imaging confirmed they matched LS-77B's scale pattern and hollow center. They were not human hair or any textile in the annex inventory. The page they touched was dated June 14th, 1978. The facing page was blank until ultraviolet light revealed faint writing, probably pressure transfer from a missing document. Recovered fragment adhered to inside of capsule lid. Appears to orient toward relay signal. Do not store with returned controls. The instruction had been ignored, buried, or quietly converted into a storage problem. At 1300, the transfer began. The containment cart rolled down corridor B with Okonkwo on the left, Hal behind it, and 2 security officers ahead. Mara watched from archive control beside the sealed binder. Mercer watched the sky logs. Inside the dome, LS-77B was furred black along one side. Its filaments lay backward as if pressed by wind no sensor detected. At the first intersection, the cart stopped. The wheels locked. No brake command had been sent. No fault appeared. The cart simply refused to move. Inside the dome, every filament stood straight up. Mercer called over the radio. Crescent 9 had come above the horizon. At the same moment, the moon rose. For the first time since the ampoule opened, the sample had both the satellite and the moon in its sky. The cart proximity alarms began chirping. The cart believed something stood in front of it. The corridor camera showed nothing. Security swept the empty space with flashlights, then looked ashamed because the corridor was fully lit. Okonkwo ordered everyone back. Hal told the operator to override the brake. Before he could, the filaments bent forward. All of them, toward the empty corridor. The alarm stopped. The cart rolled again. Later the operator said he had not touched the controls. At 13:29, The cart entered the freight elevator to the subsurface isolation facility. Protocol allowed only essential personnel inside. Okonkwo went with the sample. Pat operated the elevator because he knew the manual sequence. For 37 seconds, telemetry was normal. Then audio picked up scratching, not from inside the elevator, from inside the walls. Pat said, "It is above us." Okonkwo said, "The sample?" Pat said, "No, the moon." The elevator stopped between floors. Emergency lights shifted red, then white, then red again. The pressure buffer held. The cart stayed sealed. On camera, every filament on LS-77B pointed at the elevator ceiling. A sound like rain began on sheet metal. Tiny points pressed down from above, dimpling the ceiling panels one by one. They did not puncture. They pressed, released, pressed again. Bat repeated, "No breach, no breach, no breach." Okonkwo looked into the elevator camera and said, "This is not transfer contamination." Then the cart's outer humidity sensor registered a single drop of water. There should have been no water. A dark thread appeared on the inside of the elevator window. It slid down the glass, stopped at eye level, and lifted its end. It was not inside the cart. It had come from the elevator door seam. At 13:34, the elevator resumed descent without command. When the doors opened below, the thread was gone. Only a thin black arc remained on the glass, like a lash left after a blink. LS-77. B was sealed inside chamber S2 at 13:52. The chamber had no window. Observation was by camera only. It could switch atmosphere, purge heat, drop the stage into a ceramic kill box, or isolate itself from every network in the building. Hale wanted the kill box prepared. Okonkwo wanted one more test. She believed the sample was orienting through related material, signal exposure, and records. Destroying the rock might not destroy the rest of the chain, the binder fibers, the crescent panel, the elevator thread, the old capsule parts. "If this is contamination," she said, "it has a memory of every container that failed it." At 1500, all related objects were isolated in sealed cubes. The ampule shell, transfer cask, binder, gloves, secondary dish, and micro knife. Remove signal, remove contact, watch. For 3 hours, nothing moved. At 1812, Mercer cut the live tracking feed for Crescent 9. The filaments on LS-77B collapsed flat. The binder filaments curled inward. The secondary dish stopped spreading. The black arc on the elevator glass faded. Then Mercer restored the feed. Everything rose, not instantly, slowly, like grass after a foot lifts. The effect repeated twice. This did not mean Crescent 9 caused the growth. The satellite still existed when the feed was cut. The sample responded when human systems translated the satellite into data. It responded to observation becoming record. Hale ordered the tracking feed disconnected physically. At 1904, Mercer pulled the cable. At 1905, every monitor in the observatory room filled with static. At 1906, the static formed combed bands of light and dark. In chamber S2, LS-77B's filaments matched the pattern. The room was isolated from the network. The cable lay on the floor. In archive control, Mara heard scratching from inside the evidence box. The binder was closed. The 3 filaments between its pages had lengthened enough to push the cover up by a millimeter. She called containment support. No one answered. The phones had gone dead. The next 16 minutes are reconstructed from cameras because audio failed throughout the wing. Mara stands at her desk, one hand braced on the edge, watching the evidence box. The binder cover rises and falls slightly, not like breathing, but like a page turning in a room with no wind. On the chamber S, 2 feed, the black halo around LS 77B parts down the middle. The filaments arrange themselves along either side, revealing the basalt beneath. Inside that exposed line, something pale appears. Not a worm, not flesh, not anything wet enough to belong to an animal. A white thread, thicker than the others. It pushes up from the rock and bends toward the camera. In the corridor outside S2, Hale and Okonkwo argue silently. Hale reaches for the kill controls. They do not respond. The white thread touches the camera lens. The feed goes black. At 1923, audio returned with one sound, fibers brushing glass. Then the emergency announcement system activated. Archive humidity exceeds threshold. Mara turned towards the archive stacks. Every sealed box on shelf C14 shone as if sweating, though later inspection found the surfaces dry. Labels darkened, corners lifted, paper flexed inside folders that had not been opened in years. The evidence box cracked along one edge. Mara did not run. Reviewers later asked why. Her written answer is included in the appendix, because archives do not only store the past, they store where the past is allowed to go next. On camera, she took a roll of aluminum barrier film from a drawer. She wrapped the evidence box once, twice, 3 times, then taped the seams. Inside, black filaments pressed against the clear plastic, drawing shadows across the film. She wrote a final note on an inventory card and taped it to the wrapped box. If found outside containment, do not open to identify. Burn box unopened. At 1931, Chamber S2 regained video. The sample was still on the stage, but the basalt was hidden beneath a dense black covering. The filaments had grown together into a smooth pelt, glossy in infrared, rippling from beneath. The pelt left one triangular patch bare, a shape like the original fracture plane. Inside that patch, the basalt reflected light in a way it had not before. It looked wet. Okonkwo entered kill authorization at 1934. Hagel entered his. The ceramic kill box armed beneath the stage. Before it opened, the chamber pressure dropped to vacuum. No command was logged. In vacuum, hair should not drift. There was no air, no fluid. But the pelt lifted. Thousands of black strands spread outward until LS 77B looked like a dark star. At its center, the wet triangular patch brightened. Mercer saw a matching bright point appear on every static-filled monitor. At the same time, 3 outside observatories logged a flash near the far side lunar basin, whose old geometry the filaments had mapped. 2 systems dismissed it. The third saved it by accident. The image proves nothing by itself. A gray curve, a pale speck, noise. But when printed beside the magnified view of LS77B, the speck sits where the wet triangular patch had been. At 1936, the kill box opened. LS77B dropped. For 1 second, the dark star collapsed downward, filaments trailing behind it. Then ceramic shutters closed, and the chamber filled with white heat. The temperature rose past sensor limit. The feed washed out. The scratching stopped everywhere. Hale declared the primary sample destroyed at 1941. Okonkwo did not sign the declaration. The official version ends there. Primary anomaly destroyed. Secondary growth absent. Containment maintained. Source unresolved. No public hazard. Case file 24 includes the afternotes. The first came from the cleanup team. Inside the kill box, they found fused ceramic, slagged basalt, and no intact filaments. The sample had become a black bead embedded in the tray. Through the bead ran a hollow channel. Under magnification, the inside of that channel was lined with overlapping scales. The second afternote came from OMCO storage, where the Crescent 9 dust panel had remained sealed. The vault camera showed no growth. The screw corner smudge looked unchanged. Then a technician compared the storage box weight to its last annual inventory. It had lost 0.7 grams. The scale was checked. The box was checked. The panel was checked. No missing piece was visible. Someone wrote, "Within measurement uncertainty," and the phrase was allowed to stand because every case needs at least one mercy. The third afternote came from Mercer. Old Crescent 9 telemetry showed faint deviations for years, too minor to flag. They strengthened when the satellite passed over ground stations that had handled scans of archival lunar material. The file does not call that intelligence. It calls it coupling, a system responding to copies of its own history. Moonlight, radio pings, digitized photographs, a binder page, a human voice asking if it was ice. Each became a surface. Each surface gave the filaments somewhere to lean. The fourth afternote came from building maintenance. On November 3rd, 2025, a worker replaced a fluorescent tube outside the old basement archive C cabinet where LS-77B had spent most of his life. He noticed a dark line along the cabinet top. He assumed it was dust. He wiped it with a gloved finger. The line split into strands. They were dry, brittle, old. They had been there long before the incident. The cabinet was sealed. The glove was bagged. The photographs were sent to Okonkwo. The scale pattern matched LS-77B. The sample had been growing before anyone opened the ampule. Not visibly, perhaps. Not actively in the way the room had seen. But enough to mark the cabinet. Enough to wait in dust. Enough to let people walk past for years, under fluorescent lights, beneath a ceiling that hid the sky and did not hide the moon. That discovery forced the case backward. If the filaments had marked storage, then the ampule seal had either failed invisibly or never mattered. If the seal never mattered, then the material did not require opening in the ordinary sense. It required recognition. It required related signals, related objects, related records. The black fragment had been mislabeled for decades. Maybe misnaming it had been containment. Maybe the archive had saved everyone by being wrong. On November 9th, the review board recommended auditing all legacy lunar adjacent materials with incomplete chains for fibrous residues, mass loss, pressure marks, or anomalous orientation. The list included sample cabinets, return satellite panels, capsule liners, training film reels, binders, and digitized scans. The list was too large. It always is when the past becomes evidence. Most items were clean. A few were not. A foil strip had a single curved filament under one folded edge. A box of recovery beacon parts contained black dust that aligned when a radio test tone played nearby. An old negative showed scratches invisible in the printed image. Under magnification, they formed the same shallow wave pattern recorded in chamber S2. None of this proved life. None of it proved visitors, craft, messages, or any of the dramatic nouns people reach for when the sky becomes fashionable. What it proved was quieter. Something had touched the chain. Something had used storage, observation, cataloging, and signal tracking as a place to persist, not hidden in a desert hangar, not recovered from a crash, filed, misfiled, handled with gloves, moved between shelves, converted from paper to scan, scan to database, database to query, query to screen. Every copy a new surface, every surface a place where a filament might learn which way to lean. Okonkwo's final memo warned against metaphors of communication unless communication could be demonstrated. Pattern seeking, she wrote, could become an exposure route if the material responded to being represented. Then, in a paragraph removed from the circulation copy, but preserved in Mara's archive version, she added, "We should consider the possibility that looking for the source is part of how the source propagates." The final event occurred on December 21st, 2025, during the winter solstice audit. Cold Room 2 was checked by 2 staff members who had not been present during the incident. The silver-wrapped binder evidence box remained on its shelf. The seals were intact. Mara's warning card was faded but legible. No motion was visible. No sound was recorded. The auditors photographed the shelf and moved on. Later, Mara noticed that one photograph had a focus error. The shelf label was sharp. The evidence box was sharp. But the air between the camera and the box appeared streaked, as if the lens had captured fine black lines too close to see. She enlarged the image. The lines were not on the lens. They were suspended in the cold room air. Hundreds of them, all extremely thin, all pointing in the same direction. Mara checked the timestamp against the sky chart. The moon was below the horizon. Crescent 9 was below the horizon. No satellite pass, observatory alert, or radio burst matched the time. For the first time, the filaments were not leaning toward the moon, the satellite, a voice, a binder, a photograph, or any known part of the chain. They were pointing deeper into the archive. The direction led through Cold Room 2, through the wall, across the corridor, and into Basement Archive C, where old cabinets stood in rows under new lights. At the end of that line was not LS-77B's former cabinet. It was a cabinet no one had opened in 31 years. The drawer label read, "Unmatched returns. Do not prioritize." Mara requested authorization to inspect it. Authorization was delayed pending staffing, hazard review, and holiday closure. That delay is the last administrative entry. The final page is a printed still from the cold room photograph, enlarged until the evidence box becomes a silver blur and the air itself fills the frame. At first, it looks like scratches on black paper. Then the eye adjusts. The lines are too organized to be damaged. They hang in the image, like hair floating underwater, though the room was dry and empty and cold. Every strand points past the sealed box, past the warning card, past the locked shelf, toward a door that is not visible in the photograph. In the lower right corner, barely caught by the camera flash, one filament bends away from the others. It curves toward the viewer. Not much, just enough to suggest that while everyone was trying to determine what the sample had been reaching for, something in the archive had finally noticed it was being watched.